U.S. Taking aim at Chinese companies over suspected support for Russia in its war against Ukraine. These include new rounds of sanctions. Washington has repeatedly warned China about supporting Russia's armed forces. Join us now to talk about this and also the latest on the potential fate of TikTok in this country. Congressman Khanna of California, whose district is in the heart of Silicon Valley. He serves as a member of the Select Committee on what to do with the Chinese Communist Party. And it's good to have you with us today, Congressman.
Great to see you, Joe. Always a pleasure to be on.
Is this a red line moment? And I just saw an editorial about that the president was very strident about saying that this is unacceptable if China were to help Russia in terms of armaments. Has the line been crossed, and can we really do anything?
It is a red line, Joe. It's important to realize that, as you know, these are not just sanctions on some of the firms in China. It also includes Turkey, Slovakia, Belgium, and a number of other countries. And they're very targeted. They say you can't be supplying Putin with weapons to kill civilians in Ukraine. And look, the United States needs to be concerned about the growing relationship between Russia and China. Xi Jinping and Putin have visited each other about 30 times. And this is why it's so important, and I'm glad Speaker Johnson allowed a vote on the aid to Ukraine that many, all Democrats and many Republicans supported, because if we allow Putin to invade Ukraine, we're sending a message to China that they can go into Taiwan, and so we need to prevent it.
I guess there's a lot of conjecture swirling around. You know, we do have an election coming up, and in an interview, I guess former President Trump said that he would definitely be more, I guess, make a commitment to Taiwan to help defend Taiwan, something China really doesn't want. Do you think China is either hoping for President Biden to be reelected or even trying in certain ways to make that happen? Do you believe any of those stories?
Well, Joe, you know I'm a huge supporter of President Biden's, but the one issue that we really should try to keep out of politics is to make sure China doesn't go into Taiwan. I've worked with Mike Gallagher, who was the chair of the China Committee. We've, in a bipartisan way, made sure that we're supporting having naval superiority in the Pacific, that we supplied Taiwan with long-range weapons for deterrence. And there should be a unified message here that China militarily will not be able to go into Taiwan. And I think that should be regardless of who's in Congress or who's president.
Most of does that include keeping a lot of the tariffs on, which we've seen? A lot of these things that we thought would be reversed have not been reversed because of the realities of the situation.
Well, look, I supported some of the strategic tariffs. I'm not one of these people who says just because a previous Republican president did it, by definition, it has to be wrong. The reality is China was eating our lunch. We had manufacturing go over to China, steel left, aluminum left, textiles left. I never understood it. If someone said America doesn't need finance, let London do all the finance. We don't need Wall Street. We'd never agree. Or America doesn't need to make movies. Let India make all the movies. And yet we did that to manufacturing. So, of course, we need to rebalance our trade deficit. I think we should have a goal not to have this structural trade deficit with China by the end of the decade.
We've talked TikTok before, but I can't remember whether you're a ban if not divest or a free speech. There's a lot of people, and it doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on. People have differing opinions on this. What should we be doing? And Andrew can get involved, because Andrew, you think it's a future threat, not necessarily a present-day security threat. I don't know if you can weigh in on that as well.
Well, I agree. It may be a future threat, but I'm a free speech person, and you can't ban the speech of 170 million Americans or the livelihoods based on future possible harm. And I think there should have been more narrowly tailored legislation. Let me give you three specifics. We should have said that any transference of American data to China is illegal, and you could have held TikTok and Oracle executives accountable for that, Oracle because they're managing it. We should have said any state interference in an algorithm is illegal. And again, you could have held American investors or executives accountable. And we need a strong data privacy. But you don't have to ban 170 million Americans off an app.
What is your sense? So obviously, many of your colleagues don't just talk. Like, I talk about this as a perspective threat, meaning I don't know if I have sympathy for the argument, but I understand the argument. It's unclear to me whether there's direct evidence, as the kids would say, receipts today of genuine nefarious behavior that TikTok is engaged in on behalf of the Chinese government. And I know we can have a debate about whether TikTok's good or bad for kids, and I don't think it's great for kids and all of that. But what do you say to your colleagues, including, by the way, I think we're going to talk to Ted Cruz, who has made the argument that bad stuff is happening right now, and they also suggest, but again, they can't tell us, that they've been in, meetings that are inaccessible to us because of security clearance and the like, that there actually are nefarious things going on behind the scenes as a result of the Chinese government.
I'd like to know what they are saying. I've been in the same briefings. Let me just say that based on public reporting, have there been a few instances on public reports that there's been leakage of data to China? Yes, there has. But the solution to that is then to ban that and to hold TikTok executives or people managing that accountable. It's not to say, okay, you're going to take 170 million Americans and shut down their speech. And by the way, a lot of the federal judges that have looked at this so far have agreed with me. We have a First Amendment in this country that is very, very broad and protective. And as people have realized with the campus protests, and you could disagree with the First Amendment. You could say we protect free speech too much in this country. I tend to like the First Amendment, and I think we should be very careful before we're having broad-based restrictions on it.
Congressman, just switching gears, the state of the House of Representatives right now, it's a Seinfeld episode in a bizarro world. I just can't see a lot of this happening if the shoe were on the other foot. What do you did you vote to keep Speaker Johnson as Speaker?
I would. Look, I think he did the right thing. I think he put bills on the floor. He had us vote separately on Ukraine, on Taiwan, on Israel. What a novel concept that you should vote on a particular subject and not try to lump it all together. And I think if someone does the right thing, then they shouldn't lose their job. And I don't think we should be transactional about it. People are like, well, what are we going to get? Well, how about just he did the right thing, so we shouldn't let extreme folks take him out.